My name is Dorothy, and I am 78 years old. For nearly half a century, I've lived in this brick-and-siding colonial in a quiet suburb of Cleveland, the very house my husband Paul and I bought with trembling hands and hearts full of impossible plans. Paul has been gone for 6 years now, a silence that has settled into the very bones of the house. The grand old clock in the hall that he wound every Sunday night now ticks with a hollow, lonely sound, a constant reminder of the time he no longer has and the time I have left. My days have found their own quiet, predictable rhythm, a small life measured in sunrises, the careful tending of my rose bushes, and the obligatory weekly phone call with my only daughter, Janice. Janice is a whirlwind of a woman, perpetually caught in a storm of her own making, always frantic about money, her sales job, her husband Rick, and their 2 teenage boys. Despite her self-imposed chaos, she insisted on managing my affairs, particularly anything related to my health. "You just can't keep track of this stuff anymore, Mom," she'd often say, her smile thin and strained, a mere gesture that never reached her eyes. "You'll forget a dose or mix things up, it's safer this way." And maybe she was right. At my age, memories can soften and blur, and the sharp edges of schedules and responsibilities can sometimes feel like too much to hold on to. The cornerstone of her management was my medication. I was diagnosed with atrial fibrillation years ago. AFib, the cardiologist calls it. It's a strange betrayal by my own body, where my heart occasionally forgets its steady, lifelong rhythm and flutters like a terrified sparrow trapped against my ribs. My medicine, a small pink capsule I take every single morning with my breakfast, is the one thing that coaxes the sparrow back to its calm, steady beat. It isn't optional. It's the anchor of my physical well-being. Since Janice and her family lived a 40-minute drive away, she had established a system. At the start of each month, she would go to my pharmacy, pick up all my prescriptions, and bring them here. She'd then sit at my kitchen table, her purse clutched in her lap, and painstakingly sort the pills into my 7-day organizer. It was, on the surface, the very picture of filial devotion. "It saves you the drive and the hassle, Mom," she would explain, her keys already in hand, ready to flee the quiet of my house for her own noisy life. "And I can talk to the pharmacist, make sure everything's right. Besides, the copays are just criminal these days, aren't they?" I would always murmur my thanks, offering her a cup of tea or a slice of coffee cake that she invariably refused. "No time, Mom, gotta run." This month she seemed even more frazzled than usual. She blew into the kitchen like a cold front, dropping the crinkling white pharmacy bag on the granite countertop with a thud. "There you go, Mom. All your stuff for the next 4 weeks." I noticed a new tension in her jaw, and her eyes darted around the kitchen, assessing, calculating. "You know," she began, her voice taking on that specific, wheedling tone I had come to dread, the one that always preceded a complaint about money. "Rick and I were going over the budget last night. It's insane. The insurance company fights us on everything. And your prescriptions alone, the copay for this heart stuff is a small fortune." A familiar, hot flush of guilt crept up my neck. I was a line item in her budget, a liability. "Oh, Janice, I'm so sorry it's such a burden. You know I can give you the money. Just tell me what it costs, and I'll write you a check." She waved a dismissive, impatient hand. "No, Mom, don't be ridiculous. We'll handle it. It's our duty. It's just a lot. We want to take care of you. You know that. It's just getting harder and harder to afford it." The unspoken accusation hung in the air between us. "Your existence is expensive." She gave me a quick, bony hug that felt more like a search for a wallet than an embrace. "I've already filled your pill case for this week. The rest are in the cabinet behind the tea. I really have to get going. The boys have soccer. Call me if you need anything." And with that, she was gone, leaving a faint cloud of hairspray and simmering resentment in her wake. I sighed, the sound loud in the sudden silence, and walked to the counter. I opened the little plastic lid marked for Monday, took out the little pink pill, and swallowed it with a glass of water, placing my trust, as I always had, in the hands of my child. The first week of the new month passed uneventfully. I pruned the dead heads from my prize-winning peace roses, started rereading one of Paul's dog-eared history books, and had a pleasant chat with my next-door neighbor, Pat, as we stood on opposite sides of the chain-link fence separating our yards. But as the second week began, a strange and unsettling dissonance entered my life. It began as a whisper of wrongness, a sudden, dizzying wave of lightheadedness as I rose from the depths of my favorite armchair, a frightening gasp for air while I was simply watering my begonias on the porch. At first I dismissed it, a hot day perhaps, or as Janice was so fond of reminding me, the simple, unglamorous toll of aging. Paul used to joke with a grim smile, "Getting old is a full-contact sport, Dot." I was finally starting to feel the bruises, but the episodes grew more persistent, their presence more demanding. One afternoon, halfway up the main staircase, my heart began that frantic, chaotic drumming. It was no longer a flutter. It was a desperate, panicked pounding against my sternum, a wild alarm bell I couldn't silence. I collapsed onto the landing, my hand clamped to my chest, my breath coming in shallow, ragged bursts. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for the internal storm to pass, feeling profoundly alone in my own body. My neighbor Pat saw me through my kitchen window a few days later, sitting very still at my table, long after my breakfast should have been finished. She came over and knocked on the back door. "Dorothy, everything all right in there? You look a bit pale." I forced a smile. "Just a little tired today, Pat. Not sleeping as well as I used to." She eyed me with concern. "You sure? You've seemed a bit wobbly this past week. Maybe you should give your doctor a call." Her simple, genuine concern was a stark contrast to my daughter's reaction when I finally got up the nerve to mention it during our next phone call. "Oh, Mom, you're just overdoing it in that garden," Janice said, her voice sharp with impatience. "I keep telling you, you need to slow down. You're not 60 anymore." The condescension in her voice was a small, sharp sting. "And you are taking your pills every single morning, right? You're not forgetting?" The question was an accusation, implying that my symptoms were my own fault, a failure of compliance that was now her problem. "Of course I am, Janice," I replied, my voice shrinking under the weight of her disapproval. "First thing every morning, from the container you filled for me." There was a brief, telling silence on the line. "Well then, it must just be anxiety," she concluded with diagnostic certainty. "You've always been a worrier. Try some deep breathing. I'm sure it's nothing to be concerned about. You know if we call the doctor, they'll just want to run 1,000,000 expensive tests, and with our deductible, it would be a nightmare." The unspoken threat was perfectly clear. My health was a financial inconvenience. Do not be sick. Do not be expensive. I hung up the phone feeling foolish and ashamed, a hypochondriac burden on my busy, stressed-out daughter. I tried to follow her advice. I tried to relax. But a low-grade hum of dread became the new soundtrack to my days. My energy seeped away, leaving me feeling as faded and translucent as old linen. The world took on a soft, blurry quality, as if viewed through tears. The fear was the worst part. Fear of the stairs, fear of standing up too quickly, fear of my own treacherous heart. I began to move through my home like a trespasser, slow and cautious. I felt like a failing appliance, my internal wiring shorting out, and the one person who was supposed to be my caregiver was telling me to just ignore the sparks. My trust in her was so deeply ingrained that I began to question my own sanity instead of her care. She was my daughter. She knew best. It must all be in my head. The third Tuesday of the month dawned gray and oppressive, the Cleveland sky the color of wet concrete. The air was thick with a dampness that seemed to seep into my bones, and I awoke with a feeling of profound, leaden exhaustion, as if I had run a marathon in my sleep. My head was swimming in a persistent fog. After forcing down half a piece of toast and some weak tea, I shuffled to the kitchen counter to perform the one vital ritual of my morning, taking my medication. My hand trembled as I fumbled with the plastic pill organizer, my fingers feeling clumsy and disconnected from my brain. I popped open the small lid for Tuesday a.m. The little pink capsule sat nestled in its plastic compartment, a tiny promise of stability in a world that felt increasingly tilted. I tipped the container toward my palm, but my coordination failed me. The pill missed my hand, bounced off the countertop with a faint tick, and disappeared onto the beige tile floor. A sigh of pure frustration escaped my lips. Bending over had become a Herculean task, an invitation for a head rush that could leave me dizzy for minutes. Bracing one hand on the cool granite, I slowly, carefully, lowered myself down, my joints protesting with a series of creaks and groans. There it was, resting innocently by the leg of a kitchen chair, but as my eyes focused, a cold, sharp shock went through me. Something was terribly wrong. The capsule, a standard two-piece gelatin shell, had cracked open on impact. It wasn't a clean break. It had split along its seam, spilling a small cone of fine, white, crystalline powder onto the tile. I knelt there, frozen, staring at it. My real medication wasn't like this. I knew its consistency. One time, months ago, a capsule had been dented, and I'd seen the contents, a dense, slightly off-white, almost chalky powder. This stuff on my floor was different. It was pure, brilliant white, and it sparkled, catching the overhead kitchen light in a way that was disturbingly familiar. It looked exactly like sugar. A dread so cold and absolute it felt like ice water flooding my veins washed over me. In that moment, my heart, the very organ at the center of this deception, gave a single, hard, steady beat, a beat of terrifying clarity. With hands that no longer trembled but moved with a grim, robotic purpose, I carefully scooped up the two halves of the broken capsule and the pile of white powder onto a napkin. I pushed myself up and hobbled into the living room, my mind a maelstrom of unthinkable thoughts. Paul had been an avid stamp collector, and in the top drawer of his old mahogany desk, he kept a small, powerful magnifying glass. I retrieved it, the smooth wooden handle feeling cool and solid in my palm, a relic from a time of trust and safety. Back in the kitchen, I unfolded the napkin onto a dark placemat to create contrast. Under the lens of the magnifying glass, my worst fears were confirmed with sickening certainty. The powder was not powder at all. It was a collection of tiny, perfectly uniform crystals. It was granulated sugar, or perhaps cornstarch. It was inert. It was worthless. It was a lie. A surge of adrenaline, potent and cleansing, burned through the fog in my brain. I marched to the kitchen cabinet, the one Janice always pointed to, and pulled out the large prescription bottle from the pharmacy. The label was perfect. My name, my doctor's name, the name of the medication, the correct dosage. I twisted off the childproof cap and shook several of the pink capsules into my hand. They were identical to the one that had broken. They were all fakes. Then her words echoed in my mind, dripping with resentment. Your medication alone? It's a small fortune. The cold dread in my stomach hardened into a block of glacial ice. She wouldn't. A daughter couldn't. But the proof was right here. A handful of pink lies that could have killed me. For a full hour, perhaps longer, I sat motionless at my kitchen table. The only movement in the room was the relentless ticking of the hall clock, each tick a second of my life she had been willing to risk. The handful of fake pills lay on the dark placemat before me, a damning exhibit. The betrayal was a physical presence, a crushing weight on my chest, far more terrifying than any arrhythmia. My daughter, my Janice, my little girl who I had taught to ride a bike and held when she had nightmares. Was she trying to kill me? The thought was so grotesque, so fundamentally unnatural, that my mind recoiled from it. No. A smaller, more insidious voice of reason whispered, it was worse than that. She wasn't actively trying to kill me. She was just indifferent to whether I lived or died. She was gambling with my life, spinning the roulette wheel with my heart every single morning, all to save a few $100s on copays. She was counting on me not noticing, or if the worst happened, she was counting on the doctors shrugging and writing old age on a certificate. The sheer, breathtaking callousness of it finally broke through my shock and ignited a rage so pure and white-hot it burned away my weakness and fear. The dizzy, frail old woman who had been shuffling fearfully through her own home for weeks was gone. In her place sat a mother who had been profoundly, lethally betrayed and who was now ready for war. But I knew I needed more than just a broken pill and a suspicion. My word against hers was a fragile thing. She would paint me as a confused, paranoid, senile old woman. And who would a jury of strangers believe? A respectable working mother? Or the elderly parent she claimed to be caring for? I needed irrefutable proof, a voice of authority to back me up. I glanced at the clock on the stove. 10:30 a.m. Mr. Wright, my pharmacist, would be at his post. I had known him for 30 years. He had dispensed antibiotics for Janice's childhood ear infections, and later, the blood pressure medication that had given me 10 more years with Paul. He was a kind, gentle, and meticulously professional man. My plan began to form, sharp and clear. I found an old, empty aspirin bottle in the medicine cabinet and carefully counted 20 of the fake pink capsules into it, sealing the lid tight. Then, I went to the back of the cabinet, my heart thumping with a new, determined rhythm, and there it was. An old prescription bottle of my real heart medication from 3 months prior, before Janice's complaints about money had become a constant refrain. I'd kept it, thinking it might be useful if I ever misplaced my weekly organizer. I shook out one of the real, authentic capsules and put it in a separate zippered compartment of my purse. The drive to the pharmacy was a grim pilgrimage. I parked my old Buick and walked in, the little bell over the door chiming its familiar, cheerful welcome. Mr. Wright was behind the high counter, peering at a computer monitor through his silver-rimmed bifocals. He looked up, and his face broke into a warm smile. "Dorothy, it's wonderful to see you out and about. How have you been feeling?" The simple human kindness of the question almost shattered my composure. I took a deep, steadying breath. "Mr. Wright, I need your professional opinion on something," I said, my voice low and serious. "I have a very strange and upsetting question for you." I took out the aspirin bottle and shook one of the fraudulent capsules onto the clean counter. "This is what I have been taking for my AFib for the last few weeks." Then, I retrieved the single real pill from my purse. "And this," I said, placing it beside the other, "is what I believe I should have been taking." Mr. Wright's friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a focused frown. He looked from one pill to the other, then back at my face. He picked up both capsules with a pair of tweezers, carried them over to his brightly lit compounding station, and placed them under a large, powerful magnifying lamp. He was silent for a long, tense moment. He gently pulled one apart, then the other, examining the contents. When he finally turned back to face me, his face was ashen, and his expression was one of absolute horror. "Dorothy," he said, his voice a shocked whisper, "where did you get this first pill?" I held his gaze, my own eyes hard as flint. "My daughter Janice. She picks them up and sorts them for me." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "This pill," he said, pointing a trembling finger at the fake one, "is a placebo, a counterfeit. It is a gelatin capsule filled with what appears to be cornstarch. It has zero medicinal value. It is completely inert." He then pointed to the other. "This is your genuine medication, the one that keeps your heart stable. Dorothy, who is doing this to you?" The air rushed out of my lungs. The verdict was in. The drive home from the pharmacy was a study in cold, controlled fury. The weakness and fear had been cauterized, replaced by a diamond-hard resolve. Mr. Wright had been deeply shaken, his professional ethics and personal decency clearly offended. He'd offered to call the police immediately to file a formal report with the pharmacy board. "This is criminal, Dorothy. This is felony endangerment," he'd said, his voice trembling with indignation. But I had stopped him. A police report, even with his expert testimony, would still come down to a messy he-said-she-said situation. Janice would concoct a story. She would claim I was the one who was confused, that I must have found some old sugar pills someone had once used for practice and mixed them up myself. She would weep and play the part of the concerned, grieving daughter, and I would be the senile, accusatory crone. I needed more. I needed something she could not deny, could not twist, could not escape. I needed to catch her red-handed. My mind, now operating with a chilling clarity, began to assemble the pieces of a trap. Paul, my dear, pragmatic Paul, had a favorite saying: "Never walk into a battle unless you've already figured out how to win it." This was a battle for my life, and I was going to ensure my victory was absolute. That same afternoon, I drove to a large Best Buy in a neighboring town, a place that smelled of new plastic and hummed with the energy of modern technology. I felt like a spy from a bygone era as I navigated the aisles of flashing screens and thumping speakers. I found what I was searching for in the home security section, a small bastion of paranoia and practicality. It was a nanny cam, a device whose name now seemed darkly ironic. It was a marvel of miniaturization, a tiny, almost invisible camera lens embedded in what looked like a perfectly ordinary black USB wall charger. It recorded crystal-clear, high-definition video directly onto a micro SD card and could be monitored in real time from a simple smartphone app. I, who sometimes struggled to send a text message, felt a surge of empowerment. The young, patient clerk showed me the basics, and I purchased the camera along with the largest memory card they sold. Back in the sanctuary of my own home, I felt a grim sense of purpose settle over me. I plugged the spy charger into the wall outlet on the kitchen counter, the one right next to the toaster. It was perfectly positioned. The camera's lens had a wide, clear, and damning view of the entire counter and the medication cabinet above it. I sat at my table, practicing with the app on my old smartphone, starting and stopping the recording, until I was confident in my new clandestine skills. The stage was set. All that was missing was the lead actress. I needed to lure Janice back to the scene of the crime. I took a few deep breaths, summoning the frail, confused woman I had been pretending to be for weeks. I dialed her number. When she answered, I pitched my voice to a weak, quavering whisper. "Janice, honey," I began, injecting a pathetic tremor into my words. "I'm so sorry to bother you, darling, but I've had a bit of an accident. I think I dropped my pill organizer. The little one. And the pills went all over the floor. I tried to pick them up, but I'm so dizzy today, and they all look the same. I'm just so confused." I could almost hear her eyes rolling on the other end of the line, followed by a long, theatrical sigh of pure, put-upon martyrdom. "For Pete's sake, Mom, can't you be more careful?" "Fine, I'll come over after I get off work. Just throw all those ones from the floor away. I'll bring you a new supply from the main bottle in the cabinet. Do not take anything until I get there. You hear me?" "Oh, thank you, sweetie," I whimpered, my performance worthy of an Oscar. "You're such a lifesaver." "Yeah, well, just try not to cause any more trouble," she grumbled. And the line went dead. I placed my phone on the table, my hand perfectly steady, my face an emotionless mask. The term lifesaver had never tasted so much like ash. I opened the app, pressed the red record button, and settled in to wait. The unblinking eye was now open. Janice arrived shortly after 6, using her key to let herself in without knocking. I had arranged myself in my living room armchair, a book lying unread in my lap, trying my best to project an aura of frail helplessness. "Honestly, Mom," was her only greeting. The words clipped and sharp as she marched past me and into the kitchen. "You have one job every day, and that's to take a pill without dropping it." I said nothing. My attention was focused on the smartphone screen hidden in the folds of the Afghan covering my lap. I was watching the live feed from my secret camera, and the view was chillingly perfect. I saw Janice's back as she opened the kitchen cabinet. And then, the full brazen scope of her crime played out in high-definition color. She didn't just grab the prescription bottle with my name on it. Her movements were swift and practiced, revealing this was a routine. She reached behind a large box of Earl Grey tea bags and pulled out the real, pharmacy-filled bottle of my heart medication. The one that was supposed to be in the front. Then, from her oversized purse, she withdrew a large, clear, unlabeled Ziploc bag. The bag was filled to the brim with the counterfeit pink capsules. With an efficiency that was both horrifying and mesmerizing, she unscrewed the cap from the real bottle, callously dumped my life-saving medication into her Ziploc bag, and then refilled the authentic pharmacy bottle with the worthless sugar pills from her own supply. It was a cold, methodical, and utterly damning transaction performed under the bright, unforgiving lights of my kitchen. She had been systematically stealing my expensive, genuine medication, likely to sell it on some black market or use it for some insurance scam I couldn't begin to fathom, while leaving me with inert placebos that were actively pushing my body toward a catastrophic failure. The betrayal was so profound, so calculating, it made my stomach roil. She screwed the lid back on the bottle of fakes, placed it in the front of the cabinet where I would expect to see it, and tucked the Ziploc bag, now heavy with my stolen medicine, deep into her purse. She then took the bottle of fakes, counted out a week's worth into my clean pill organizer, and strode into the living room with it. "All set, Mom," she announced, placing the organizer on the end table beside me with a clatter. Her smile was a thin, painted-on slash. "Now try not to be so clumsy with this one." "I'll do my best, dear," I whispered, my voice thick with an emotion she mistook for gratitude. "Thank you for coming all this way." "It's fine," she said, already turning to leave. "Just try to think of the cost next time you're being careless." The door clicked shut behind her. The moment I heard her car's engine roar to life and fade down the street, I jabbed the stop recording button on my phone and saved the video file to both the device and a secure cloud server. My hands were shaking now, not from weakness, but from a potent cocktail of vindication and revulsion. I watched the recording again, and then a third time. The unblinking eye of that tiny hidden camera had captured the absolute truth. It had captured her crime, her contempt, her chilling disregard for the life of the woman who brought her into the world. The next morning, I did not call my daughter. I did not call my doctor. I carefully removed the tiny memory card from the charger, placed it inside a small protective plastic case, put the case in my purse, and drove myself to the county police station. I walked in, my back straight, my head held high, and asked the officer at the front desk to speak with a detective. A tired-looking man with weary but kind eyes named Detective Walsh led me to a small, windowless interview room. "Ma'am," he began gently, "what can we do for you today?" I took a deep breath, met his gaze without flinching, and said, "I would like to report a crime. My daughter Janice has been systematically trying to kill me." Then, with a steady hand, I placed the small memory card on the metal table between us. To his everlasting credit, Detective Walsh did not treat me like a dotty old woman. He listened to my entire story, his pen scratching furiously across his notepad, his expression shifting from professional patience to visible concern, and finally to a quiet, simmering anger on my behalf. When he plugged the memory card into his laptop and watched the video, he simply shook his head and muttered, "My God." He assured me that this was now a top priority case. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of official action I had only ever seen on television. Detective Walsh sent an officer with me back to the pharmacy to get a formal sworn statement from a still horrified Mr. Wright. They collected the remaining fake pills from my home as evidence, handling them with gloves as if they were toxic, which, in a way, they were. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, they made their move. Two uniformed officers, with Detective Walsh supervising, walked into the glass and steel downtown office building where Janice worked as an accountant. They arrested her at her desk in full view of her colleagues. I wasn't there to see it, but Detective Walsh called me afterward to let me know it was done. He said she was utterly blindsided, then became hysterical and indignant, loudly proclaiming her innocence and threatening to sue them all right up until the moment he quietly mentioned the existence of a video recording. Then, he said, she went silent. The real explosion came that night. My doorbell began ringing frantically, insistently, just after 9 p.m. I looked through the peephole and saw Rick, Janice's husband. I had never seen the man so completely unraveled. His usual slicked-back hair was askew, his face was pale and puffy, and his eyes were wide with a raw, animal panic. I opened the door and he practically stumbled into my foyer. "Dorothy, you have to call this off," he gasped, his voice cracking with desperation. "I just spent hours bailing her out. Hours! They've charged her with felony endangerment of an elderly person. Grand theft. Her career is gone. Our lives, they're over. You can't do this. She's your daughter." I stood there, silent and immobile as a statue, letting his wave of panicked accusations break against me. When he saw that his shouting was having no effect on my stony expression, he changed tactics. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial, wheedling whisper. "Look," he said, taking a step closer, "this is all just a terrible, terrible misunderstanding, right? A mistake. You know Janice. She's been under so much pressure at work. And we're in debt, Dorothy. We're in some really bad credit card debt. She wasn't thinking clearly. She would never ever want to hurt you." He was trying to build a bridge of excuses over a chasm of malice. I said nothing. His eyes darted around my quiet, orderly living room as if the walls themselves were judging him. "What if we make it right?" he pressed, his voice slick with a salesman's desperate hope. What if we make restitution for the stress and anxiety this whole mix-up has caused you, for any potential future medical expenses? He reached into his inside jacket pocket and withdrew a folded cashier's check. My eyes flickered down to it. He unfolded it, showing me the amount in the box. $20,000. It was a shocking sum. It was likely every liquid penny they had, scraped together from savings, emergency funds, and panicked credit card advances. Here, he said, thrusting the check at me. Take it. It's yours. Just, you take this, and tomorrow morning you call Detective Walsh. You tell him you were confused. You tell him you've reconciled. You tell him you won't testify and you want to drop all the charges. Please, Dorothy. It's the only way to save our family. I looked from the check to his sweaty, desperate face. He was offering me a bribe. He was trying to purchase my silence. A slow, cold smile, the first genuine smile I'd had in weeks, spread across my face. I reached out a steady hand and took the check from his. All right, Rick, I said, my voice soft as silk. His entire body sagged in a wave of shuddering relief. Oh, thank God, Dorothy. Thank you. We'll make it up to you, I swear. He practically bolted from my house, a man convinced he had just bought his wife's freedom. I closed and locked the door behind him, walked to the dining room table, and laid the check down. I had absolutely no intention of calling the detective. Justice would run its course. But restitution? I decided I would gladly accept that. The following Monday morning found me in my favorite armchair, the one Paul had always claimed, with a steaming mug of English breakfast tea and a vibrant, glossy stack of travel brochures on the end table. The house was still, but it was a new kind of silence. It wasn't the hollow, lonely quiet of before. It was a peaceful, sovereign quiet. It was the sound of my life belonging completely to me again. On the table, sitting atop a brochure for a European river cruise, was the cashier's check for $20,000. I had already deposited it via my phone's banking app. It was my money now. I picked up my smartphone, my new tool of liberation, and confidently dialed the number for the Holland America line. Yes, hello, I said, my voice resonating with a clarity and strength I hadn't heard in years. I'd like to book a reservation for your full transit cruise through the Panama Canal, the one that sails from Fort Lauderdale to San Diego. I listened for a moment, a smile playing on my lips. Yes, a veranda suite, please. Midship, the best one you have available. Price is not an object. As the cheerful booking agent on the other end of the line confirmed my details and congratulated me on my wonderful choice, my eyes drifted to the silver-framed photograph of Paul on the mantelpiece. He was younger in the photo, caught in a moment of laughter on a trip to Niagara Falls, his eyes crinkling at the corners, full of the love and good-natured mischief that had been the bedrock of my life. We had always talked about seeing the Panama Canal. Paul was a history buff and an amateur engineer at heart, and he was fascinated by the sheer audacity of its construction. We'll go when we retire, Dot, he'd always promised, patting my hand. We'll see the world's greatest shortcut. But his heart, the very thing I was now fighting to protect, had given out before we ever got the chance. Janice's monstrous betrayal had, in its own dark and twisted way, been a kind of gift. It had shocked me out of the gentle, resigned stupor of widowhood and old age. It had reminded me that I was a survivor, a fighter. And it had, through Rick's pathetic and desperate attempt at bribery, provided the exact funds needed to finally fulfill the promise I had made to my husband. The legal proceedings against Janice would grind forward. Detective Walsh had been very clear. With the video evidence and the pharmacist's testimony, the case was airtight. My testimony would be helpful, but it was no longer strictly necessary to secure a conviction. She would face the consequences of her greed and her cruelty. Her life, as Rick had so dramatically wailed, would be forever changed. But that was her story to live now, not mine. My story was sailing for a new chapter. After I ended the call with the cruise line, the official confirmation already pinging in my email inbox, I stood up and walked to the fireplace. I picked up Paul's photograph, tracing the line of his smiling face with my fingertip. Well, Frankie, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, but not with sadness. It took a little longer than we planned, but we're finally going to see it. And the best part? Our loving daughter paid for the whole ticket. I placed the photo carefully back on the mantel and turned to look out the large picture window. The sun was brilliant, my roses were in full, fragrant bloom, and for the first time in a long, long time, the horizon looked clear, vast, and full of incredible promise.